The sun beat down like a hammer on an anvil, turning the Arizona desert into a furnace. It was 102 degrees Fahrenheit, the kind of heat that shimmered off the asphalt and made the air thick enough to choke on. Jackson Reed gripped the steering wheel of his battered old pickup truck, sweat trickling down the back of his neck and soaking into his faded blue work shirt. The air conditioner had given up the ghost weeks ago, and he hadn't had the time or money to fix it. He was pushing 40 miles an hour on the back road, cutting through the barren outskirts of Kingman, a shortcut that shaved 10 minutes off his trip. Every second counted. He had to get back to his garage, unload the compressor parts he'd picked up in the next town over, and then race to Leo's school before the bell rang. Being late again would mean another note from the principal, and Jackson couldn't afford that kind of mark on his record as a single dad. The road was empty, just endless stretches of red dirt scrub brush and the occasional tumbleweed rolling across like a ghost from an old western. Jackson wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, glancing at the clock on the dash 1:12 p.m. He cracked the window for a breeze, but all it did was blast him with more hot air carrying the faint scent of creosote and dust. If the day hadn't been this brutal, if he'd stuck to the main highway, if he hadn't glanced to the side at just the right moment, he might have driven right past her. But there she was, standing like a mirage beside a sleek sports car pulled haphazardly onto the shoulder. The vehicle was out of place in this rugged terrain, a shiny red convertible that screamed city money, not desert practicality. Its rear tire was flat as a pancake, the rim digging into the soft earth. The woman was bent over it, her long dark hair whipping in the hot wind, one hand shielding her eyes from the glare. She wore a light sundress that clung to her from the sweat, and her pale skin was already turning pink under the relentless sun. No shade, no water bottle in sight, no other cars for miles. She looked lost, frustrated, and utterly alone. Jackson's foot eased off the gas before his brain caught up. He wasn't the type to ignore someone in trouble, not after what he'd been through. Pulling over a few yards ahead, he killed the engine and stepped out, the heat hitting him like a wall. His boots crunched on the gravel as he approached toolbox in hand from habit. "Ma'am, you all right? Looks like you've got a flat." The woman straightened up, turning toward him with a start. Her eyes were wide, a deep brown that held a mix of wariness and relief. She was younger than he'd thought, mid-30s maybe, with sharp features softened by exhaustion. Dust streaked her hands and the hem of her dress, and she clutched a designer handbag like it was a lifeline. The tire, it just blew out. It just blew. I tried to call for help, but there's no signal out here. Her voice was horse-edged with the strain of the heat and carried a faint accent he couldn't place, maybe from the East Coast. Jackson nodded, setting his toolbox down without a word. He knelt by the wheel, inspecting the damage. The tire was shredded, probably from a sharp rock or debris on this godforsaken road. "Name's Jackson. I run a garage about 6 miles back toward town. This won't take long." He popped open her trunk, empty except for a spare tire and a jack that looked like it had never been used. As he worked loosening the lug nuts with practiced ease, he felt her eyes on him. She hovered nearby, arms crossed, glancing nervously at the empty horizon. "I'm Soledad," she said after a moment, her tone tentative. I just moved here. My place is at the end of Appleton Road." She wiped her forehead, leaving a smudge of dirt. Jackson paused, wrench in hand. Appleton Road. That old stretch led to a sprawling estate on the edge of town, abandoned for over a decade. Folks called it the Ghost House. Boarded-up windows, overgrown weeds, rumors of some rich family scandal that left it empty. He'd driven past it 100 times, never seen a soul. That big place, been empty forever. "You fixing it up?" Soledad hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. "Something like that. I needed a change." She didn't elaborate, and Jackson didn't push. People came to places like Kingman for all sorts of reasons, running from debts, bad marriages, or just the noise of the world. He focused on the task, swapping out the flat for the spare, tightening the bolts, and even checking the other tires for good measure. The sun bore down, making his shirt stick to his back, but he moved steadily, ignoring the burn. 15 minutes later, he stood up, wiping his hands on a rag from his pocket. "There you go. Should hold until you get to a shop. I'd get it checked soon. That spare's not meant for long hauls, and these roads are rough." Soledad reached into her bag, pulling out her wallet. "Thank you, really. How much do I owe you?" She fumbled for bills, her fingers trembling slightly from the heat or nerves he couldn't tell. Jackson shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. No charge. Wouldn't feel right taking money for something like this, especially not out here in the middle of nowhere. Just get somewhere cool and drink some water. She stared at him, wallet still open, as if she couldn't quite believe it. For a second, her guarded expression cracked, revealing something vulnerable, gratitude mixed with surprise. That's kind of you. It's been a while since someone helped without expecting something back. He shrugged, packing up his tools. World's tough enough without making it harder on each other. He tipped his hat, an old habit from his days working ranches, and headed back to his truck. As he drove away, glancing in the rearview mirror, he saw her standing there watching him go. The image stuck with him, the elegant car, the dusty woman, the empty desert. Appleton Road. What was someone like her doing in a forgotten place like that? By the time he pulled up to Leo's school, the bell ringing and kids spilling out, Jackson had pushed the encounter to the back of his mind. He had a son to pick up, dinner to make, and a compressor to install before dark. Little did he know that Flat Tire was just the beginning. The woman from the roadside wasn't just a stranger passing through. She was about to become the neighbor who would upend his quiet, guarded life, one act of unexpected kindness at a time. Jackson pulled into the driveway of his modest ranch-style home just as the afternoon heat began to ease, the sun dipping lower toward the jagged horizon. The house was a simple affair. 2 bedrooms, a sagging front porch with a hammock he'd hung for lazy evenings, and a yard dotted with creosote bushes and the remnants of his late wife's flower garden. He killed the engine, grabbed the compressor parts from the bed of the truck, and headed inside, the screen door creaking behind him. Leo was already home, sprawled on the living room floor with his model spaceship kit scattered around him. At 10 years old, the boy had his mother's curly brown hair and an endless curiosity that kept Jackson on his toes. "Dad, you're late. I thought we were going to work on the ship today." Leo jumped up, brushing plastic pieces off his shorts. "Sorry, buddy. Got held up on the way back." Jackson set the boxes down in the corner and ruffled Leo's hair. Helped a lady with a flat tire out on the back road. Hot as hell out there she was, stuck bad. Leo's eyes widened. Like in the middle of nowhere. Was she okay? Yes, she was fine. Just new in town, I think. Said she's moving into that big old place at the end of Appleton Road. The haunted house. Leo's voice dropped to a dramatic whisper, referencing the local kids' tales about the abandoned estate with its overgrown vines and boarded windows. Jackson chuckled, heading to the kitchen to grab a cold soda from the fridge. Not haunted, just empty for too long. Probably needs a lot of work. He popped the tab and took a long swig, the cool fizz cutting through the day's dust. Anyway, let's get dinner started. Pizza sound good tomorrow. You've got the day off school. Leo's face lit up. Yes, with extra cheese. You got it. The evening passed in their usual rhythm. Jackson tinkering in the garage while Leo finished his homework, the two of them eating sandwiches for dinner and watching an old sci-fi movie until Leo's eyelids drooped. As Jackson tucked him in, he felt the familiar ache of routine, the quiet house echoing with memories of Sarah. She'd been gone 4 years now, taken in a freak car accident on a rainy night, leaving him to navigate fatherhood alone. He'd quit his engineering job in Phoenix, moved back to Kingman to be near his aging mom, and opened the garage to make ends meet. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Leo needed stability more than luxury. The next morning dawned, clear and hot again, though a faint breeze stirred the air. Jackson was in the kitchen, kneading dough for their promised pizza flour, dusting his forearms when a knock sounded at the door. He wiped his hands on a towel and opened it. Surprised to find Soledad standing on the porch. She looked different in the morning light, her hair tied back neatly, wearing a simple linen blouse and jeans that still carried a hint of city polish. In her hands was a woven basket covered with a cloth. "Morning," she said, a tentative smile on her lips. "I baked some bread last night, sourdough with rosemary, and there's plum jam I made, to say thank you for yesterday. I don't know what I would have done without your help." Jackson stepped back, gesturing her inside. "That's real kind of you. Come on in. I'm Jackson, by the way. Didn't properly introduce myself out there." "Soledad," she replied, stepping over the threshold. The house smelled of yeast and coffee, a far cry from the sterile mansions she'd known. She set the basket on the counter, glancing around at the lived-in space, the fridge covered in Leo's drawings, the stack of tools by the back door. "Dad, who's here?" Leo's voice called from the hallway, and he appeared still in his pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He stopped short, staring at Soledad with open curiosity. "This is Soledad, the lady I told you about. She's our new neighbor." Jackson turned to her. "This is my son, Leo." Soledad knelt down to his level, her smile warming. "Hi, Leo. Nice to meet you. I heard you're building a spaceship." Leo's shyness melted away. "Yeah. Want to see it's almost done?" He grabbed her hand without hesitation and led her to the living room, chattering about thrusters and laser cannons. Jackson watched from the kitchen, a soft amusement in his chest. It had been a while since anyone new had come into their home like this. He unpacked the basket, the bread still warm, the jam a deep purple hue, and sliced a piece, spreading it thickly. "Coffee," he called. "Please," Soledad replied, laughing as Leo demonstrated his model's warp speed button. They ended up at the table, the impromptu breakfast turning into a full meal. Leo dominated the conversation, asking Soledad a barrage of questions. "Where'd you learn to bake bread? Do you like spaceships? Have you ever seen a real cactus flower bloom?" She answered each one patiently, her laughter genuine, a lightness in her eyes that hadn't been there on the roadside. As they ate, Jackson shared a bit more. "Leo's mom passed when he was 5. Hit and run on a bad night. After that, I figured the city life wasn't for us anymore. Moved back here, opened the garage. It's not much, but it keeps the lights on." Soledad nodded, her expression softening with understanding. "I'm sorry. That must have been hard." She paused, stirring her coffee. What if someone had everything, money, a big life, but walked away from it all? Started over in a place like this? Jackson met her gaze, sensing the weight behind the question. "I'd say that takes guts. Not everyone's brave enough to chase what really matters." He didn't pry, but the words hung between them, an unspoken invitation. By the time Soledad left, promising to bring garlic bread the next day, Leo was beaming. "She's nice, Dad. Can she come over again?" Jackson ruffled his hair. "If she wants to." As he watched her walk down the dusty path toward Appleton Road, he felt a subtle shift, a crack in the walls he'd built around his heart. Little habits formed quickly after that. Soledad would stop by with fresh-baked goods or a potted plant for the yard. Jackson would offer iced lemonade or fix a loose hinge on her gate. Leo invited her to help with his models, and she'd sit on the floor listening to his stories with rapt attention. For Soledad, these moments were a balm, the simple joy of a child's laughter, the quiet companionship of a man who asked for nothing. She found herself lingering longer each time, the emptiness of her sprawling house feeling more pronounced when she returned. Jackson noticed her rare smiles, the way her shoulders relaxed in their company. He didn't know her full story yet, but he sensed she was running from something big. And for the first time in years, he wondered if he was ready to let someone in. The days blurred into a comfortable routine in the dusty haze of Kingman summers. Soledad's visits became as predictable as the afternoon winds, mornings with fresh loaves or jars of homemade preserves, afternoons helping Leo with his homework under the shade of the porch hammock. Jackson found himself looking forward to the soft knock on the door, the way her presence filled the small house with a warmth he hadn't realized was missing. He'd catch glimpses of her through the garage window walking down the path from Appleton Road, her steps lighter than that first day in the desert heat. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, Soledad arrived with a potted cactus blooming with tiny pink flowers. "For your yard," she said, handing it to Jackson. "It reminded me of this place, tough but beautiful when it opens up." He took it, their fingers brushing briefly, sending an unexpected spark through him. "Thanks. Leo will love it. He's been asking about planting something." Jackson set the pot on the porch rail, glancing at her. She looked more at ease now, the city polish fading into something simpler, freckles from the sun hair tousled by the breeze. But there was still a shadow in her eyes, a hesitance that made him wonder what she was holding back. Inside, Leo was at the kitchen table, his tongue poking out in concentration as he glued the final pieces to his spaceship model. "Soledad, look, it's done." He held it up triumphantly, the plastic gleaming under the overhead light. She knelt beside him, examining it with genuine interest. "That's amazing, Leo. Does it have a name?" The Star Voyager, he declared. It can go to Mars and back in one day. Hey, Soledad, are you rich, like really rich? Jackson froze in the doorway, about to intervene, but Soledad didn't flinch. She sat back on her heels, meeting Leo's innocent gaze. I used to be. I had a big house. Fancy cars, all that. But it didn't make me happy. Sometimes having too much makes you forget what's important. Leo tilted his head, processing. Like what? Like people who care about you for who you are, not what you have. She glanced up at Jackson, then her expression soft but guarded. Or a quiet place where you can just be. Leo nodded solemnly. Well, Dad's not rich, but he's the best. We have pizza nights and he fixes everything. You should stay here more. It's fun. Soledad's laugh was light, but Jackson saw the flicker of emotion in her eyes, something like longing mixed with fear. I'd like that, she said quietly. That night after Leo was asleep, Jackson walked her partway down the path toward her house. The stars were out a vast canopy over the desert crickets chirping in the cooling air. He's right, you know, Jackson said, breaking the silence. You're welcome anytime. It's been nice having you around. She stopped, turning to face him. The moonlight cast shadows on her face, highlighting the curve of her cheek. Jackson, why are you so kind? To a stranger who just showed up, you're not a stranger anymore. He shoved his hands in his pockets, feeling a vulnerability he hadn't allowed in years. After Sarah died, I shut a lot of things out, focused on Leo the garage. But seeing you out there that day, it reminded me life's too short to ignore folks in need. Soledad looked away toward the distant outline of her estate. I appreciate it, more than you know. She hesitated as if weighing her words. But there's things about me. I left a lot behind, a life that wasn't mine anymore. He didn't press, sensing the wall she was building. You don't have to tell me everything, just know whatever it is, it doesn't change the here and now. She met his eyes then, and for a moment, the barrier cracked. Thank you for not asking too much. They stood there. In the quiet, the air charged with unspoken possibilities. When she finally turned to go, Jackson watched until her silhouette faded into the night, a strange ache settling in his chest. He was falling for her slowly, undeniably, and it scared him as much as it thrilled him. The next few weeks deepened the bond. Soledad helped Leo with a school project on desert wildlife, drawing sketches of lizards and cacti that made him beam with pride. Jackson fixed a leaky faucet at her place, lingering over coffee as she shared bits of her past. Growing up in a cold mansion, endless board meetings, relationships built on alliances rather than affection. She spoke in fragments like puzzle pieces she wasn't ready to assemble fully. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch watching Leo ride his bike in lazy circles, he asked gently, "What made you choose Kingman of all places?" She traced the rim of her glass lemonade, sweating in the heat. I needed to disappear, to find out who I am without the noise. Her voice dropped. But sometimes I worry the noise will find me. Jackson reached over, covering her hand with his. It was the first deliberate touch, simple and reassuring. If it does, you're not alone. She squeezed back, but pulled away after a moment, her smile strained. That night, back in her echoing house, Soledad opened her laptop for the first time in weeks. The inbox was flooded, lawyers demanding updates, board members questioning her absence, a stern message from her uncle. You can't run forever, Soledad. The company needs its air. She slammed it shut, heart pounding. The peace she'd found with Jackson and Leo felt fragile, like a mirage that could vanish in the desert wind. She couldn't let her old world drag them down, but how long could she hide? Jackson, lying awake in his bed, stared at the ceiling fan, whirring lazily. He replayed her words, the fear in her eyes. Whatever she was running from, it was big, and as much as he wanted to protect her, he knew the truth would surface eventually. For now, though, he'd hold on to the moments, the laughter in his kitchen, Leo's easy affection, the quiet evenings that felt like family. Little by little, Soledad was opening up, and Jackson was realizing his heart had room for more than just memories. The morning broke with a deceptive calm, the desert air crisp before the heat built its fury. Jackson was under the hood of a customer's old sedan in his garage, grease staining his hands as he tightened a bolt. The radio hummed classic rock faintly in the background, and Leo sat on a stool nearby, sketching aliens for his next model. Soledad had promised to stop by later with fresh lemonade, her way of turning the sweltering afternoons into something bearable. The sound of engines disrupted the peace, 3 black SUVs rolling up the gravel drive, dust clouds billowing behind them. Jackson straightened, wiping his forehead as men in crisp suits stepped out. The lead one, a tall figure with a clipboard and an air of authority, scanned the property before approaching. "Mr. Reed," the man asked, his voice polished but impersonal. "That's me. Can I help you? We're looking for Soledad Alvarez. We understand she's been residing nearby." Jackson's stomach tightened. "Alvarez." He glanced toward Appleton Road, then back. "She's my neighbor. Why is she in trouble?" The man handed him a business card, Alvarez Holdings, Phoenix. "Not trouble, exactly, but her presence here is irregular. She's the sole heir to the company. We've been instructed to bring her back." Before Jackson could respond, Soledad emerged from the path, her face paling as she saw the vehicles. She wore a simple tank top and shorts, but her posture shifted, shoulders squaring like someone facing a familiar battle. "Gentlemen," she said evenly, though her voice carried a tremor, "I told you on the phone I'm not returning." The lead man, Mr. Harlan, per the card, sighed. "Ms. Alvarez, this isn't optional. The board is in crisis. Your uncle insists. My uncle can handle it without me," she cut in, her eyes flashing. "I signed the papers relinquishing day-to-day control months ago." Harlan glanced at Jackson and Leo, who had wandered over wide-eyed. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Involving locals complicates things." Jackson stepped forward, positioning himself between them. "She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to. If she says no, that's the end of it." Soledad touched his arm, a silent thank you. Harlan's gaze hardened. "Mr. Reed, you seem like a decent man, but Ms. Alvarez's world is different. Billions at stake, family obligations. Don't drag yourself or your son into this." Leo's face crumpled at the mention, and he tugged Jackson's sleeve. "Dad, what's happening is Soledad leaving." "Nobody," Jackson said firmly, though doubt flickered in his chest. "Go inside for a minute, okay?" Leo hesitated, glancing at Soledad with worry before retreating to the house. Harlan turned back to her. "We'll give you 48 hours to reconsider, but if you don't, the consequences, legal, financial, will follow you here." The SUVs departed in a swirl of dust, leaving silence in their wake. Soledad sank onto the garage step, head in her hands. Jackson sat beside her, waiting. "I'm sorry," she whispered finally. "I should have told you sooner." He nodded. "Start from the beginning." She drew a breath, the words tumbling out like a dam breaking. "Alvarez Holdings, real estate empire, hotels, developments across the Southwest. My father built it, died young. My uncle took over, but I'm the heir. Grew up in mansions, private schools, everything scripted. Marriages arranged for alliances. My last one ended in divorce when I refused to play the game. It was all fake smiles for cameras, deals over dinner. I felt like a puppet. So I left. Sold what I could, quietly bought that old estate to hide. I wanted to breathe, to be normal." Jackson listened, piecing together the fragments she'd shared before. The fancy car, the hesitation in her stories, it all fit. Why Kingman? Random pin on a map. Far from Phoenix, from everyone who knew Soledad Alvarez. She looked at him, eyes glistening. "But then I met you and Leo. For the first time, I felt seen, not for money or name, just me." He took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "You are seen. And whatever this is, we'll face it." But the stress took its toll. That night, Leo tossed in his sleep, mumbling about bad men taking Soledad away. By morning, he was burning up, fever spiking to 102 degrees, just like the desert heat that had brought her into their lives. Jackson rushed him to the local clinic, Soledad insisting on coming along. The doctor diagnosed a viral infection exacerbated by anxiety. "He needs rest and fluids," she said. "Keep him calm." At the hospital, as Leo dozed under cool sheets, Soledad sat by his bed, wiping his forehead with a damp cloth. "I'm so sorry," she murmured to Jackson, who paced the room. "This is my fault. If I'd stayed away—" "Stop." He knelt beside her, his voice low but fierce. "You didn't cause this. Those suits did, stirring up trouble. Leo loves you. He's scared of losing you like he lost his mom." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I love him too. And you. Jackson, you've given me more in these months than all the wealth ever did." He cupped her face, thumb brushing away a tear. "Then fight for this. For us. Don't let them pull you back." As the fever broke hours later, Leo stirred his small hand, reaching for hers. "Soledad, you're still here." "Always," she whispered, grasping it tightly. In that sterile room, amid the beeps of monitors and the faint scent of antiseptic, Jackson realized the depth of his feelings. Soledad wasn't just a neighbor or a friend. She was the missing piece, the one who made their house feel like a home again. And as Leo smiled weakly, drifting back to sleep, Jackson knew he'd stand by her no matter what shadows from her past came calling. The Alvarez empire could wait. This right here was what mattered. 3 months passed in a whirlwind of decisions and quiet resolve. The black SUVs never returned, but the echoes of that confrontation lingered like dust after a storm. Soledad spent long nights in her echoing estate, poring over documents and making calls she'd dreaded for months. She drafted letters to the board, consulted lawyers in hushed tones, and finally, in a press release that rippled through Phoenix's business circles, she publicly stepped away from Alvarez Holdings. "I choose to build a legacy of community over capital." The statement read, announcing a new foundation funded by her personal shares. The money would support education and health care in rural desert towns like Kingman, starting with free vehicle repairs for low-income workers headquartered at Jackson's garage. The news hit the local paper first, then spread. Neighbors whispered in the diner, customers at the garage asked questions, but Jackson fielded them all with a steady nod. "She's doing good work," he'd say, and leave it at that. Soledad sold off parts of her estate's land to fund the initiative, keeping only the main house as a quiet retreat. But she didn't stay there long. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of crimson, she arrived at Jackson's door with a single suitcase and a determined smile. "If the offer still stands," she said, "I'd like to stay. For good." He pulled her into a hug, the weight of the world lifting from his shoulders. "It always stood," Leo whooped with joy when he heard tackling her in a bear hug. "You're really staying. Like forever." "Forever," she promised, laughing as he dragged her inside to show off his latest drawing, a family portrait with 3 stick figures under a big sun. The transition was seamless, like she'd always belonged. Soledad turned Jackson's spare room into a cozy office for the foundation, her days filled with grant applications and community meetings. Jackson's garage buzzed with new life volunteers fixing cars for single parents, elderly folks, and migrant workers. Leo thrived, his grades improving with Soledad's patient tutoring, his laughter echoing through the house more freely than before. One lazy afternoon, as the heat shimmered outside, Leo burst into the kitchen where Jackson and Soledad were chopping vegetables for dinner. He skidded to a halt on his bike, cheeks flushed from riding circles in the yard. "Hey, Soledad," he asked, suddenly serious. "Yes, kiddo." She set down the knife, giving him her full attention. "Are you going to stay and be my mom, like for real?" The question hung in the air, simple and profound. Jackson froze, his heart pounding. Soledad's eyes welled up, her hand flying to her mouth. "Leo, I'd love that. More than anything." Leo beamed, pumping his fist. "Yes, I knew it." He hugged her tightly, then turned to Jackson. "Right, Dad. We're a family now." Jackson swallowed the lump in his throat, pulling them both into his arms. "Yeah, buddy, we are." In that moment, the pieces clicked, years of grief softening into something new, a future he hadn't dared imagine. As the months turned into a year, their life settled into a rhythm of shared joys and small challenges. Soledad's foundation grew, sponsoring scholarships for local kids like Leo, who dreamed of becoming an engineer like his dad once was. Jackson expanded the garage with her support, hiring help and turning it into a community hub. They married quietly under the desert stars, Leo as the ring bearer, beaming with pride. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Jackson wrapped an arm around Soledad. Leo played in the yard, chasing fireflies that danced in the cooling air. "I never promised you the world," Jackson murmured, his voice low against her ear. She leaned into him, her hand on his. "I don't need the world, just this a place to belong with people who stay." He kissed her temple, the desert breeze whispering around them. In the end, home wasn't the grand estate at the end of Appleton Road, nor the mansions of her past. It was here, in a simple house with creaky floors and a yard full of blooming cacti, where a man had stopped his truck in the blistering heat to help a stranger. Where a boy had opened his heart without question. Where kindness had rewritten their stories, turning solitude into something unbreakable. As the stars emerged twinkling like promises, Jackson knew they'd found what mattered most, not in wealth or escape, but in the quiet choice to build a life together, one sunset at a time.